Hello there, Rob.
Yo, what's up, Mike?
What's up, buddy? How are you, man?
Pretty good, man. We got a huge show today, man. We're talking about a very big band. I was listening to The Greatest Hit all day at work today.
Oh, cool. What do you think?
Oh, fantastic. But you know what? I think I heard them I think we might have them in the Jukebox International.
Um, I don't think so. I don't remember. I don't think so. But we're talking about Sweet, in case you don't know.
Yeah, but we got
Um,
like the Ballroom Blitz and we got Fox on the Run. I think it
yeah,
might be
no,
on a
you do. That's right. You have Desolation Boulevard on the juke. That's right. I forgot.
yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool. That's one
Yeah.
of their best albums.
Yeah, it was fantastic, man. We're not doing video today. We did the video on the conspiracy. We're trying to get the video working. Once me and Mike got it, you're gonna see our lovely faces all the time.
Very soon, very soon.
So, Mike, what you got for today? So this is the Rock Show 82, Mike. Can you believe we done 82 of these?
Yeah, man. It's just time is flying, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's crazy.
we're gonna have to come up with something for the 100th show. That'll be like mid-January.
Yeah. Oh man, Mick, we want to do Mick Jagger?
No, I'm saying that'll be
Oh
mid-January.
man. Oh, I said you want to do.
No, nothing on Mick Jagger. Well, we'll see. You never know. You never know.
Dude, maybe we could do like a rock show. Maybe do we already did one of the Rolling Stone album. Maybe we could do another Ramones album for the 100 show. We could do like the best of like the top 10 best shows of the.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll come up with something. We'll throw some ideas around. We got a couple of months, so we're good. We're
So
way ahead of time.
let me ask you, what you got for me today? Because I know you were doing research. You were writing up the show all day.
Yeah.
And
Well, let me tell you, I'm real happy to do this show because Sweet, to me, are one of the most like kind of forgotten and underrated bands out there. They were at one point. I mean, they never really in America. They were always kind of like on the cusp of breaking through, but never quite did. They had some top 10 success with some singles, but one thing with Sweet that would plague them through their whole career is their albums were never big hits, like not number one. Okay, they would have number one singles in countries, but not number one albums. For some reason, it was something that they never got away from being more of a singles band than an album band. You know?
and that's always shocking with like bands, great band, because you know what? When you hear them and the energy and they were rocking and they were considered more of a glam band, but they changed their styles. I think they were like,
You
to
know,
me,
they started off as a bubblegum band, bubblegum
yeah,
pop.
I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, and you know, transformed into like a glam band, and then just into a hard rock band, and you know, all those genres that they, you know, the styles that they were in, they had hits. They were successful. These guys were talented. They were good musicians.
They were very good musicians.
They all could sing their asses off. Okay, I mean, every one of them, even the drummer Mick Tucker, they all could have been lead singers, which is you don't see that. You don't usually see four guys that could sing like that in one band. You
No.
know? Doesn't happen. But it's very interesting. The origins of Sweet go all the way back to 1962.
Let me ask you a question before you do that. Were the Beatles like that? Could everybody sings on the Beatles?
Yeah, that would be an example. If you want to count Ringo as a good singer, if you feel generous, you could do that.
But he sang. He tried to sing a few songs, right?
Yeah, he did. I mean, he sang fucking Yellow Submarine, you know.
Yeah.
But he wasn't really a singer. You know, it was more like just give Ringo something to do. But he was talented. I mean, I'm not, you know, these guys in Sweet, they all had that. The three of them really, like Connolly, Priest, and Tucker, all had kind of the same range in their voice. But Andy Scott, the guitar player, he had a higher octave in his voice. So once he got in the band, he could hit those high notes that the other guys couldn't. And you could hear that in their music. But, yeah, I mean, the Beatles were an example of that. Sure, to answer your question.
Yeah.
You know? So okay, we'll get into it. In '62, there was a British soul band called Wainwright's Gentlemen. All right. Now there was a guy named Chris Wright, and he was the original singer, but he got replaced in 1964 by Ian Gillan. Now Ian Gillan, you might recognize that name. He would later leave the band to form Deep Purple. Okay, Smoke on the Water, all that.
Yeah,
Um,
Smoke on the Water.
yep. Big, heavy band, late 60s, early 70s. Mick Tucker, the drummer who would eventually be in Sweet, would replace the original drummer Phil Kenton. And late 66, there would be a Scottish-born vocalist named Brian Connolly. He would become the singer in Sweet later on, and he joined that band. So you had Tucker and Connolly. They would stay in that band, Wainwright's Gentlemen, until 1968, when the band broke up, and the remaining members of Robin Box and Roger Hills ended up joining a band called White Flames. Now, you might remember them because they had that one hit, My Baby Loves Lovin'.
Yeah, I remember
Okay?
that.
Yeah. Interesting little connection right there with that was kind of a bubblegum song, In January of '68, Tucker and Connolly started a new band called the Sweet Shop. And they ended up getting Steve Priest, who was the bassist to a band called The Army, to join up. Okay? Now, Priest had been in bands through the '60s, including a band called The Countdowns that recorded with Joe Meek. Now, Joe Meek is a guy we should do a show on. I've mentioned him once or twice. He was kind of like the British Phil Spector. And he had a very successful, a very short, and a very tragic career. We could talk about it one day on a show. Frank Torpey was a guy who had spent some time with Tucker and Connolly in Wainwright's Gentlemen. He was recruited on guitar in the Sweet Shop. So they would play their first gig on March 9th, 1968 at the Pavilion in a place called Hemel Hempstead. It's an area about 25 miles north of London. So they became well known on the pub circuit pretty quick, and it led to a contract with Fontana Records. Now, you remember Fontana. They come up a lot, right?
Yep.
So they quickly would be scooped up by a manager named Paul Nicholas. And this is a guy, he was a talented guy. He started out as a manager, but he actually ended up being in the musical Hair. Okay? So Nicholas introduced them to record producer Phil Wayman, and the Sweet Shop would shorten their name to the Sweet.
Yeah, that was good.
Right. And Phil Wayman would begin working with them, recording with them, and in July of '68, their debut single was called Slow Motion. It would come out in July of '68, and it would come out on Fontana, and it would bomb. It would fail the chart. So the single itself, if you could find that single today, it's worth like hundreds of dollars on eBay. I've seen it. Yeah, it's very rare. Fontana Records would drop them after that, and guitarist Frank Torpey would quit the band. They would get a guy named Mick Stewart on guitar in 1969, and he was a friend of Phil Wayman's. He was brought in because he knew Phil, and he had previously worked with him. And Stewart also had worked with a guy named Johnny Kidd. Johnny Kidd and the Pirates was a band, okay? They had that hit, Shake It All Over. You might remember that.
Yep, I remember that.
He was the guitarist in that lineup. Now
that was Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, right?
Yeah, Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. Now, EMI's Parlophone label would start to get interested in them, and they would release 3 bubblegum pop singles, one called Lollipop Man, one called All You'll Ever Get From Me, and then they did a cover of an Archie song called Get on the Line. They were all released between September of '69 and June of '70, so it was about a 10-month period, 9-month period. But they all bombed.
Yeah.
All right, all those singles. And Mick Stewart would get discouraged and he'd leave the band. So, at that point, Connolly and Tucker was introduced by Wayman to 2 young songwriters. Now, these names are very important because they would go on to much bigger things with these 2 guys, and that's Nicky Chinn and Mike Chapman. Chinn and Chapman.
Yep. Right. Those guys are great.
Yeah. Now they were looking for a band to record and sing some demos that they had. So Connolly, Priest, and Tucker, who all had great voices, right? They provided the vocal tracks over a song called Funny Funny. So it was three guys, Connolly, Priest, and Tucker. They did not play on these songs, okay? They had they sang, but there was a guitarist named Pip Williams, and John Roberts was on bass, and Phil Wayman actually played the drums. He could play drums. So they began kind of shopping this demo of a song called Funny Funny. So at the time, they didn't have a guitar player, a regular guitar player. So they ended up settling in for a guy named Andy Scott. After a bunch of auditions, they came across him.
Yeah.
He's Welsh born, all right, and he made his live debut on September 26, 1970, at the Windsor Ballroom in Redcar, which is a section of England called North Yorkshire. So the Suite began experimenting with this idea of kind of like fusing bubblegum music with an influence of the Monkees and harmonies like the Hollies.
I thought that was actually funny with the Monkees.
Well, and a heaviness of the Who. But yeah, I mean, they were kind of like the Monkees in a way.
Yeah.
The Monkees didn't write their own music, at least in the beginning, through like the TV show and all that stuff. They had a lot of writers. One group was called Boyce and Hart. They were big writers for them. I think they had a couple of others.
Mike, let me ask you a question. Would it be weird if we did the Monkees one day?
No, not at all. I love the Monkees.
I love the Monkees. I love the show too.
I would do a show with the Monkees. Absolutely, we should do that. They were a very interesting band. I mean, they started out kind of like nobody took them seriously.
Yeah.
But they actually could play, and they could write music, and they did later on. They wrote some good songs.
Yeah. Hey, think about David Bowie had to change. I mean, Davy Jones. David Bowie's real name was Davy Jones. He had to change it to David Bowie because of Davy Jones from the Monkees.
Yeah, Davy Jones from the Monkees was huge. You couldn't have his name, right?
Yeah.
But what the band was trying to do was mix these, the heaviness of the Who and bubblegum music. And that actual idea would be something that even the Ramones would do and other like glam rock bands that came later. It was just this idea of having like a heavy pop sound. And that would eventually kick off punk rock, 7 years later.
Yeah.
Pretty much, So they would manage to end up on a compilation record, all right? The demo really wasn't going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But the compilation record was on a low-budget label called Music for Pleasure in late 1970. And their three singles that recently bombed were included on that compilation. So they had an album with some other bands and stuff on a compilation that, at least they were out there on vinyl.
Yeah, what song was that? Was it what song was the one that they put on that album?
It was the three that had bombed, like the Lollipop Man,
the Lollipop Man,
and the Archie song.
Yeah,
yeah, and they covered like if there's such a thing, they covered an obscure Archie song because really the only song everybody knows from the Archies is Sugar Sugar.
Yes, sure.
But they actually, it's funny because I went through a phase years ago where I was listening to a lot of that late 60s bubblegum. And I have like a collection of Archie stuff, and it's great. It's just great. I mean, if you like Sugar Sugar, it's all like that. But they would do their first UK TV appearance in December 1970 on a pop show called Liftoff, where they did perform Funny Funny.
Yeah.
And they would sign a management deal with the songwriting team of Chin and Chapman, with Phil Wayman brought on as executive producer. So not only was Chin and Chapman managing them, they were writing for them, okay? And Phil Wayman would produce.
But those guys were legit guys,
They were legit. I mean, they were just starting out.
Yeah.
But they, it was in the beginning there, it was just a great combination of talented musicians and singers and this songwriting team and producing. Okay, so they were locked in with that. Now they ended up signing a contract with RCA Records, and that was the RCA was the main label, but in the U.S. and Canada, they were distributed under Bell
I
Records until
remember Bell Records. A
1973.
lot of
Yeah,
thing was Bell Records back in the days.
yeah. It was like a silver label with a
Yeah,
looked like the phone company Bell
yeah.
symbol.
It was
Yeah,
something. It was like a big thing that went on for. People go look at old record, you would see it was
yeah.
like,
You
what the
know who
fuck?
was on? You know who was fucking on Bell like at that time?
Who?
The Partridge Family.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like if you look at the old single for "I Think I Love You," it's
Yeah.
on Bell. It's on Bell.
Let me ask you, was the Partridge Family, were they real singer? Only the one guy could
No,
sing.
no. It was David Cassidy was the Partridge Family.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. It was he had people playing with him. He's another guy we could do a show on because he was an interesting dude. I mean, he hated being on that show after a while. Okay, he wanted to be Jimi Hendrix, and he could play. He could play guitar very well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no. He was a very good musician, and he was never allowed to kind of develop that into anything because he was stuck in that teeny bopper thing.
Yeah.
And if you remember the Partridge Family, he was supposed to be in high school, right?
Yeah.
He was like 25.
Yeah.
So he was like stuck in that for years through the 70s, But anyway, Bell Records would release them in the U.S. and Canada until 1973, and then later on Capitol Records would release their stuff here. But Funny Funny was released as a single in March of 71, and it went top 20 in a lot of countries, not in the U.S., but in a lot of European countries and around the world. Next was a single called Coco, and that was released in June of 71. That got to number 2 in the UK. And then there was a follow-up single called Alexander Graham Bell.
That was actually a good song, Alexander.
It was a good song. And it went to number 3 in October of 71. They didn't play on any of these songs, believe it or not.
I believe it.
Yeah, they only sang, and they would sing as a quartet with their vocals, So the Sweet would come out with a full album in November of 71. It was called Funny How Sweet Coco Can Be.
Yeah, that's funny, all the songs.
Yeah, they mixed all the words into the label. That's funny. But it had the recent singles, and there was some new tracks in there, including a cover of the Lovin' Spoonful's Daydream, and they did a cover of the Supremes' Reflections.
Oh, yeah.
Which is that's very good, too.
That's an excellent, actual version. If you never heard it, check it out. I heard it today for the first time.
I think it was on that Greatest Hits I said.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
That's kind of a forgotten early one,
Yeah, it's like, holy shit.
Yeah, they did it very well. And the song was maybe only about 2 years old at that point.
Yeah.
So it was still fresh in people's minds. But that album was produced by Phil Wayman, and it didn't really sell. It didn't make much of a splash.
Mike, you know what surprised me about the Sweet? There was such an energetic band and stuff like that. I can't believe that they only had a few singles that were hits.
Well, they had several singles that were big.
No, they were big hits. I know, but it was like it's shocking because some of those albums had some great songs. It wasn't like they had.
Well, that's what I was saying before.
Which it blows my mind.
Yeah, no, really. I mean, the albums themselves didn't sell like the singles. They didn't have number 1 albums, okay? Because the singles would go to number 1 sometimes or go top 10, top 20. But when it came to the album, people just didn't buy them the same way. And that was kind of strange because in the 70s, albums were big.
Yeah, albums were definitely great.
But, and if you listen to Sweet studio albums, the tracks that were not released as singles are strong.
Yeah.
They're not really filler stuff.
No,
like garbage.
They're songs that could be number 1 hits.
Yeah, it's true. And it was just strange that they were in that kind of in that pattern.
Let me ask you another question real quick. Did they ever have a B-side that took off more than an A-side?
I don't believe so. Not that I can think of. They didn't have that happen to them.
Because, remember, we went through that weird phase in the 80s where people were taking out single and the B-side was so much better than the A-side.
Yeah, well, that's happened that's happened many times over the years with bands where they put out the A side and the B side is the one the DJs play.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean it happens, but I don't think that happened with Sweet. They were pretty much, and sometimes what they would do is they would put an A side out, and that might be the Chin Chapman song, written song, and then the B side might be a song they wrote.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they would do that sometimes. So it was an interesting thing. But in February of '72, they would come out with a song called Papa Joe. And that went top 20 in the UK, and it actually got to #1 in Finland. And that was like their first #1 in Finland.
Wow.
Okay. And it's funny, you think Finland, it's ice and snow and cold. And Papa Joe sounds like a song from Jamaica. It's got steel drums on it and everything. Okay, so I guess songs like that sell in Finland, right?
Yeah.
But now the next two singles would be big for a couple of reasons. The song Little Willie and the song Wigwam Bam would both make it to #4 in the UK. All right. Now that was in '72. In '73, Little Willie would be re-released as a single in America and make it to #3.
That's huge.
All right, and that was their biggest American hit ever.
Yeah.
Okay, got to #3. Now I got to mention that it was huge, not only because it was huge for them, but it was huge for me. Okay, because Little Willie is the first record I ever bought, and that was when I was 4 years old in 1973 on my birthday. Right? Now you could ask my parents. For some reason, I loved that song when it was on the radio. I used to go ape shit when it would go on the radio. Okay, and I think finally I begged them enough, and got some birthday money and went down and bought the record. It's actually, to be honest with you, buying that record at 4 years old is like my earliest memory.
Wow, that's definitely a very early memory. Like, holy shit.
And it's funny. I mean, it was a top 3 hit. It was their biggest hit. And Sweet were never really huge in America.
No.
And it's funny how so many years later I loved the band and they were the first record I ever bought,
Dude, but that lineup, those guys, you know what? Any of those guys could have easily be gone and do their own band. They didn't have to even stay together, and they played and played and played,
Yeah, I mean, they never gave up, and they were very prolific, putting 1-2 albums out a year, singles, touring. I mean, these guys had energy.
Yeah, definitely they do. When you hear them play, they come out it's just like a very upbeat, hard fucking guitar, drum. It's like fuck.
Big beat. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the thing about Little Willie and Wigwam Bam is that these 2 tracks were the first ones that they actually played instruments on. Okay, that they released. So they were also at that point, if you listen to those songs, they're not bubblegum songs anymore. These are like more hard rock type singles.
Oh, I don't even call them glam. I thought they were more like rock and roll, even close to even a metal kind of feel.
Yeah, well, at times, yeah. They definitely were lumped in with the glam stuff, and they did that themselves. I mean, because they would wear makeup, they put the makeup on. And they also, wore outrageous clothes. We'll get into that in a little bit. They were not afraid to shock. Okay, the whole glam thing was a cultural thing in England, and it was a generational thing. The younger kids were into it. The adults were appalled by it because you had men in drag. Okay, and they would play it up. They would camp it up. And, some people thought they were gay. They were not gay. But, you see some of the clips of them playing live, and they're camping it up. They're just having fun. But in January of '73...
That was almost like Hana Rock. They looked like a bunch of girls, too, and they were just playing it.
Yeah, I mean, they were getting more girls than anybody, Hanoi Rock.
Yeah, they were like banging everything, man.
Yeah, well, same with the New York Dolls,
Oh yeah,
absolutely. Same time as Sweet. So in January of '73, they would release the single "Blockbuster," and that would be their first #1 in the UK, and it stayed there for 5 weeks straight. right after that, in May, they would release a single called Hellraiser, and that got to number 2.
Yep.
Okay. Now, Bell Records in America would release their first American album called The Suite, and that was in July of
Yep.
'73. It kind of had
Yep.
like some of the singles, and it was a different mix of stuff. And the band, in several attempts to promote these new singles, went out on a few TV shows in England. One was called Top of the Pops. You heard of that?
Yeah.
And it was a Christmas show that they did on Top of the Pops. Now, the bass player Steve Priest got in trouble for this. Okay, he actually performed that show in a full SS uniform with a Hitler mustache and an armband swastika. Okay, so there they were on stage. They were kind of a glam band. Okay, and you got this one guy dressed up like an SS soldier, but he had makeup on. Okay, with a Hitler mustache. It just was hilarious. So they
singing a Christmas
no,
song.
I don't know. They didn't do a Christmas
No?
song. It was I think they
Oh.
did Blockbuster. It just happened to be it
Oh,
was
okay.
it was a Top of the Pops Christmas special. That's all it was. But
Wow.
yeah, it was crazy. So through '73, the band was having big success. Okay, but they were kind of struggling internally with their management and their main songwriters, Chin and Chapman.
Yeah.
The problem was they felt that they still had this like bubblegum image, even though they were kind of doing things to stop that. They didn't play those songs anymore. They didn't play Papa Joe. They didn't play Funny Funny. Okay, but the problem was they still had a lot of fans coming out that wanted to hear that.
But you know what? They didn't even need to play that because it was already done, man.
Well, it was already done, but they had this like fan base from before, and it was like little girls and shit. Okay, and then when they got heavier with Little Willie and Wigwam Bam and Hellraiser and stuff, then they got a whole new audience. So there was kind of like this crossover period where they had both, and they gave up on the bubblegum stuff. They said, no, we're not doing that no more. And at times, okay, for instance, there was a show in '73 at the Palace Theater in Kilmarnock, okay, that they ended up having bottles thrown at them.
Oh man!
Okay, they had to leave because they were getting hit with bottles, and it was because the people didn't know the songs that they were doing. They wanted to hear Funny Funny.
Yeah, and Papa Joe,
Yeah.
Papa Joe, yeah.
Yeah, and they were out. They were dressed up in drag, in makeup. And these, there's sections of England in those days, you would have got your ass handed to you if you did that. Okay, to show up like that on stage.
So Mike, they were getting probably by this time. It's like almost like that glam rock explosion, right? They probably were compared to Gary Glitter, T-Rex,
Bowie,
Queens, everybody, right? So this was like a huge movement, right? So they were like,
the glam rock scene was absolutely huge. It was kicked off by T-Rex, Mark Bolan and T-Rex. And, Bowie would take it to a totally different level. But then you had other bands like, Gary Glitter. You had bands like Slade. You had Sweet. Okay, we're doing a show on Slade next week. Okay?
Yeah, Wizard too.
Wizard was an interesting band. That was Roy Wood, who was in a band called The Move with a guy named Jeff Lynne. And when The Move broke up, Jeff Lynne and Roy started ELO, Electric Light Orchestra. And and then Roy would only be with them briefly, very briefly, and then start Wizard. Yeah. And they were kind of like a weird glam band.
That's fascinating. Just that there is fascinating.
Definitely. And that incident I talked about where they had the bottles thrown at them, okay, that's kind of what the song Ballroom Blitz is about. It was written about that. Okay. So by the end of '73, they also went for another name change, and they stopped calling themselves The Sweet and dropped the and just became Sweet.
I think that sounds so much better.
Yeah, yeah. It was just an evolution of the name, you know. So by '74, the band was looking to record a new album, but they were looking to start writing their own stuff. So it kind of took them on a crash course with Chin and Chapman,
Of
who
course.
and you know they wrote their biggest hits for them. So they were also growing tired of the glam image too. All right, they were tired of doing this like makeup thing. So Phil Wayman was brought in again to produce, and the album was called Sweet Fanny Adams, and it was released in April of '74. Now, tracks like the title track Sweet FA and a track called Set Me Free were real hard rocking songs, and they were
Yeah,
actually
they were great songs.
yeah, and they were written by the band. They were written by the band, not Chin and
Yeah.
Chapman. Okay, and they were proven to the world and to themselves that they could write their own stuff. I think, you know, people knew that they didn't write their own music, and in the early '70s, I don't think too many people cared about that. But when it came to maybe rock critics and things like that, it was definitely like a detriment. You know, it wasn't. It made them kind of like look not too serious. You know. So, but they were a serious band, and they knew they could write their own stuff. And Chin and Chapman knew they could. Okay, it wasn't like that they were just, you know, feeling bad for them and writing their songs.
Yeah.
They knew they could do it. So they backed off and they let them write the songs. Okay, now they also kind of toned down the glam rock image at that point in late '74, and they kind of just looked like a hard rocking band. You know, they still had the same hairdos. They didn't wear the makeup, but they wore like leather and more like bands that were around with like a hard rock image more than glam, you know? So,
But they were definitely looking, you know what? They were definitely looking, but they weren't glam. They were more like hard rock, man. They were playing like hard rock. To me, it wasn't glam no more when they started doing that. They were playing pretty much metal rock. That's what it sounds to me, even
yeah,
though,
it was just rock and roll. It was just,
yeah,
hard rock and roll. You could have put them in a, you know, you could have had a concert with them with like Kiss or something like that. You know what I mean?
Mike, you read my mind. I was going to say, I said you could have put them as the opening band for Kiss, and it would be a perfect
Yeah,
segue to
yeah,
whatever was going on.
yeah. I too bad they never played together. That would have been interesting.
Yeah.
You know, now one kind of tragic thing that happened during the Sweet Fanny Adams album is that Brian Connolly was injured in a fist fight. All right. Now, one thing you got to know about Connolly, and pretty much the whole band, but Connolly especially, he was a hard drinker. All right. And that would eventually take his life. But he got into a fist fight. I think it was in a bar or something outside a bar. And his he got his throat was injured. I think he got punched in the throat.
Yeah, he got definitely punched in the throat or hit, but
Yeah,
he definitely got fucked up.
yeah, and he couldn't do a lot of his vocals on that album. And Steve Priest and Andy Scott kind of filled in on it and did it for him. Like for instance, the song "No You Don't."
Yep.
Okay, the song "Into the Night" and the song "Restless."
Yeah.
Brian's not singing on that. Okay, now the band, you know, were tight, and they never told the press what happened. It never got out that he was hurt. And some shows that they had scheduled that they had to cancel, they just said he had like a sore throat, like a throat infection.
Yeah,
Okay.
so they were hiding this for a while,
Well,
right?
you could do that in those days, you know, you could. And but unfortunately, the injury really turned out to be permanent because he never had the range that he used to have. Okay, because remember these guys could really sing, and they just, you know, after that he would need help with his vocals on all the albums. So most countries at that time, they didn't release any singles from that album, Sweet Fanny Adams, except in Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. And they released their version of the Peppermint Twist, okay, that was on that album. And it was actually done without the band's knowledge. RCA put that out and didn't tell them. And it got to #1 in Australia,
Wow.
the Peppermint Twist. So they would be touring all over the place. But Sweet Fanny Adams would be Sweet's only studio album to make the UK top 40. All right,
Okay.
and that goes back to what I was saying a couple of times already. Is that's their highest charting album, and it just cracked the top 40. Okay, so they didn't sell a lot of albums. But in June of '74, the Who would invite them to open for them at the Charlton soccer team's stadium.
And that's huge.
Yeah, it was a huge thing, but they had to turn the gig down because of Brian's throat problem.
Yeah.
So they couldn't do it. And that would have been big for them because they were gigantic, huge Who fans, you know?
That might have changed the whole career if they
It
would have
could.
just done that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could have, but unfortunately, he couldn't do it. He was still recovering. So later in the summer of '74, they parted ways with Phil Wainman. Everything had kind of run their course because
Yeah.
they were starting to be interested in producing themselves. It was then that they recorded Desolation Boulevard with Mike Chapman producing. Okay, so they got half of that Chin Chapman team back, Mike Chapman, and he produced that album. Now remember, Mike Chapman and Chin was still managing them.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were still involved, but they recorded Desolation Boulevard, which to me is like, I think it's their best album.
Yeah, Chapman definitely did a good role in producing this album because this album was definitely a great album.
Yeah, he would produce a lot of great people. He was involved with Blondie. I think he produced "Eat to the Beat."
Oh, he did?
Yeah, and "Eat to the Beat," or was it even "Parallel Lines"? It was one of those two. And he also would work with Pat Benatar.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like Pat Benatar does a version of "No You Don't" I think it's on her first album, and it's very good. You know that the first one or two Pat Benatar albums are really good. They would record this album in 6 days. Okay,
Because he was from Australia, right? He was like an Australian guy, right? Mike Chapman.
Thought he was British.
No, I think Chapman was. Born in Australia. Then he moved. He emerged like in Great Britain.
It's possible. That's a good question.
You know what? Yeah. Because I think because he's born definitely in Australia. Yeah.
Okay, that's possible.
I just looked it up real quick.
Oh, okay.
Chapman, and they talk about the Chapman and Chin, and yeah, you were right about Blondie. Chapman offered some girls to Blondie. The song eventually gave to Racy instead. Debbie Hasman refers to Chapman as a dictator. She called him a dictator.
Oh, well. What album did he do? Was it Parallel Lines or "Eat to the Beat"?
That's what I'm looking at right now. I don't see that. But the guy did a bunch of fucking work with a bunch of people. Holy shit, man.
Yeah. No, I mean, that Chin Chapman writing team, they worked with a lot of people and they produced a lot. Definitely. But getting back to Desolation Boulevard, it was recorded in 6 days and it kind of has a very raw live sound to it. So
yeah,
they would release a single called "The 16s," and that would come out in July of '74 when they were still kind of working on the album. They put out that single, and then there was a song called "Turn It Down," and that was released in November. That song went top 10. Okay, but the outstanding single on Desolation Boulevard for me is "Fox on the Run." Okay, now that's a song. I mean, I remember
"Fox on the Run" was a great fucking song.
Yeah. I remember as a kid hearing that song in the mid '70s, and it was like you couldn't get away from it. It ended up being a number 5 hit in the United States. But one thing you got to know about that song, the album version is very different than the single version.
Yeah.
Did you notice the difference? Did you play them both? Or?
Yeah, it's very different. Like it's I don't know why did they do that? What happened with that?
Well, I think that when they put it out on the record, RCA said, well, it's a good song, but it's not really good for a single. It needs a little bit of something to it. And they added kind of like a poppier sound to it. Okay.
Yeah.
It had like a little different beginning to it. and you hear some kind of spacey sounds and stuff in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's not really on the studio, the album version of it. Um, both versions are good,
Yeah.
but the one that was the single version, that was the big hit.
Yeah,
So
Mike, you were right. Parallel Lines was the one
Parallel
that he
Lines,
did. Yep.
yeah, right, that's true. I think, yeah, I think that was the only album he did for Blondie, and think how huge that was.
Yeah, but Debbie Harry,
Debbie Harry didn't want to work with him
he
again,
said
right?
he was rough. He probably beat her.
Yeah, she probably liked
Yeah.
it. Now, okay, so the version also the U.S. version of Desolation Boulevard. All right, now it had a cover of their big billboard with all their faces on it that was put
Yeah.
on the Sunset Strip. The version, the U.S. version, is different than the U.K. version, even the album. Okay, Ballroom Blitz and the single version of Fox on the Run is included on the U.S. version, and they also put some songs from Sweet Fanny Adams on there.
Okay.
Now, side one is all Chapman and Chin written songs, and side two of the record is all Sweet written songs. That's how they did it.
So,
Now,
Mike, technically, when they released something in the U.S., it was almost like some kind of greatest hit album.
they were weird like that because they were kind of like the record company would release it differently in both countries. Um, not too many places. Not you don't see that really anymore too much.
No.
But for some reason, this was back in the day when bands would put out singles in between albums that weren't
Yeah.
on the albums, and sometimes those singles would take off. Like it was a British band, it might take off in America, and then when you come out with the album, it wasn't going to be on the album because then nobody would buy it, right? But then they wouldn't buy it because they already had the single. So
Yeah.
sometimes you had to put it on there just to even get anybody to buy it. You know, so in different countries things were released differently sometimes depending on what was selling.
Yeah.
You know, so other songs from Sweet Fanny Adams would go on there, and would be a little bit different. I've actually heard both. Um, there's also a great version. It's an interesting song. Uh, the song called "The Man with the Golden Arm." Okay.
Yeah.
Now there was a Frank Sinatra movie called the fuck was it called? The Man with the Golden Arm. Right. That's what it was
There's
called.
also a kung fu
Yeah,
movie, The Kid with the Golden Arm.
the Kid with the Golden Arm. But the Man with the Golden Arm is a Sinatra flick that he's a musician. He's a jazz drummer, and he is a junkie. Okay, and it's really the first movie that deals with this. It came out like around 59, 1960, something like that. And
Wow.
there's a theme to it there's a theme song that's throughout the whole movie. You hear it, and the suite used to open up with that.
Wow.
Okay, and there's actually an 8.5 minute long drum solo in there. Now that was not put on the American version, but it's actually on the British.
The British version of the song, they got it.
The British version of Desolation Boulevard, the album.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's very cool.
How many
This
times have you ever heard like an 8 minute drum solo?
Led Zeppelin. That's about it, man.
That's it, man. Not too
Yeah,
many people
you
do
know,
that.
Moby Dick, by Led Zeppelin. Now, riding high into '75, they would release a single called "Action" in July, and that got to number 15 in the UK. Most of the second half of '75 they spent in Munich, Germany, at a place called Musicland Studios. They were working on a totally band-written album and totally produced by them album, and that would be called "Give Us a Wink." Okay, now "Give Us a Wink" would be actually completed in '75, but the record company held off releasing it until later in '76 because Desolation Boulevard was doing so well in the United States. It actually got to number 25, and it went to number 5 in Canada. So that was, one of their best-selling albums ever. Okay. Give a Wink was held back. So what RCA did in the meantime is they would release a double album only in Europe, and it was called Strung Up, and it came out in November of '75. This is a very rare album if you could find it too. I've never actually heard it, to be honest with you. It's a live album.
And it's a double album, right?
It's a double album. It's live in '73 in London is one of the records,
Okay.
and the other one is just a bunch of previously released singles all put together. There was one track that was new, and it was written by Chin and Chapman. And it was called "I Want to Be Committed."
Wow. I want to be committed.
I want to be committed. Right. Now, Andy Scott would be a little busy himself, and he would release a solo single called Lady Starlight. All right. It didn't really do much. It just was something he wanted to do. So in January of '76, a new single came out called The Lies in Your Eyes. And that was released, and it went top 10 in Europe, but it only got to number 35 in the UK. So Give Us a Wink was finally released in March of that year, and the band began an American tour right away. What they were trying to do was really build their popularity based on the success of Desolation Boulevard. When they came, they kind of like disregarded Give Us a Wink in the set lists. And they did pretty much just everything from Desolation Boulevard and before that. There was a new single called Action also, right? That was released in America.
Yeah.
And that was doing okay, so they would include that as well. But this headlining tour that they were on started off with problems right away. There was a guy named Paul Kossoff, and he was the ex-guitarist in a band called Free. You remember the song All Right Now?
Yep.
Okay. Now, he had a band after Free broke up, and it was called Backstreet Crawler. And they were supposed to be the supporting band for Sweet on that tour. But Kossoff died of a drug overdose. And they had to scramble for like an opening band all the time. And there was actually one appearance at the Santa Monica Civic Center on March 24th of that year that Sweet played the Free song All Right Now with Richie Blackmore.
Yeah.
So kind of like a tribute to Paul Kossoff.
Yeah, to the deaf Free guitarist. Yep.
Right. Now, the tour itself would be a financial disaster. They had to actually cancel a bunch of dates at the end. The band ended up leaving the tour early, canceling the dates, and doing shows in Scandinavia and Germany to kind of like recoup some of their finances. They ended up in Japan, and it was here that Connolly's voice really, the throat injury he had really gotten bad because they were constantly touring, constantly recording. I think he never really healed right,
Yeah.
And they needed to have a break. So between October of '76 and January of '77, Sweet would write and produce a new album called Off the Record, and it would come out in April of '77. There would be a single called Lost Angels, and that was really only a hit in Germany. It really didn't do that well.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It didn't take off. And then there was another single released later called The Fever of Love, and that only charted in Germany as well. They kind of were changing their style a little bit, all right? They were going into almost a Euro pop direction. They were kind of interested in, we brought up ELO before. They were kind of getting into like incorporating like strings and stuff into their music, and it would prove to be, pretty successful commercially. So right away, that song "Fever of Love" it didn't do well in Europe, but it actually was top 10 in South Africa. All right, so they ended up doing a tour. I don't think they went there, but they toured the United States in '77. They were supposed to tour the States in '77 with Aerosmith, but the band ended up canceling it, and they never actually toured in support of that album at all for some reason. I think a lot of it had to do with Connolly.
Yeah, I think his voice was pretty much done by then.
His voice, was having problems, and also he was drinking. There was a lot of drinking, some drug taking going on. He liked his cocaine. He liked his
Yeah,
alcohol. He
but
liked
think
to get
about it.
hard.
His voice is damaged, and he's singing and he's live. You know how long can you go for? You know what I mean?
Yeah, not many more years, you know.
Not many
But
more, man.
yeah, now in '77, the Sweet would leave RCA Records and they would sign a new record deal with Polydor. Sweet's manager at the time was David Walker. Okay, and they had gotten rid of Chin and Chapman at that point. And a guy named David Walker was part of a management company called Handle Artists, and he actually got them that deal with Polydor, and they say it was for something like £750,000.
Yeah, it was a
It was
lot of fucking money.
a lot of money in those days. Now, Capitol Records, since about '74, had been issuing the Sweet albums in the U.S., Canada, and Japan. They took over from Bell, and they would continue to do so until 1980. Okay, so they still had the Capitol connection. But the first album on Polydor was called Level Headed, and it was released in January of '78. And like I said, their sound was starting to change. They were incorporating kind of like what ELO was doing, like a lot of strings and classical music into their sound. It was melodic. They had a lot of ballads. They kind of softened things a little bit. Um, there would be a duet with a female vocalist named Stevie, okay? And it was Stevie and Brian Connolly would do a song called Love Letters. It was a French title, Lettres d'amour, Love Letters, okay? So the single off that album was a song called Love is Like Oxygen.
Yep.
That song, I remember when that song came out. I mean, it was a top 10 hit in the United States, and it was their last top 10 hit. Okay, it was a top 10 in the U.S., the U.K., and Germany. All right, and the way that song was arranged, Andy Scott, who wrote the song, actually got what was called the Ivor Novello Award for
Yeah.
that. So it was an interesting thing that they were able to get that award. Another single was called California Nights off that album,
Yep.
and that would feature Steve Priest on lead vocals. And that would be released in May of '78, and it would peak at number 23 in Germany.
So that award is almost like their form of the Grammys, almost.
No,
No.
no, no. It's more for. I think that award is more for classical music.
Wow. How the hell
Okay.
do you? How was that? That's crazy.
Well, if you listen to Love Is Like Oxygen and a couple of the other songs on there, they were doing something. I'm not saying they were like doing classical music, but they were incorporating like orchestrated music into the rock music that they were doing. It was an interesting experiment. Had it been like a lesser band, it would have sucked. Okay, but they kind of like with their harmonizing with their voices, even though Connolly's voice was starting to go, the other
Yeah.
three guys could still sing. So you didn't really notice it that much. It just Connolly, between his drinking and his drug taking and stuff, and his voice not being so strong, the live shows were a little harder to do for him. But in the studio at that point, they could still kind of fake it.
Yeah,
So
and now he's the beginning of the end for this guy's coming soon.
pretty much, yeah. Brian Connolly, like I said, he had a bad drinking problem for years, but things really came to a head on the U.S. tour they did with Bob Seger in '78. It was between March and May that they were in the States. There was one particular gig in Birmingham, Alabama, where they had a bunch of Capitol Records executives in the crowd. Okay, and Connolly was on stage and he was drunk and totally incoherent, and he ended up being so lumped up that he actually collapsed on stage. Okay. So right in front of the record executives, that was not good. They went back to Britain after that for a little while, but they came back in July to do another leg of the American tour, and they ended up having some successful shows opening for Foghat and Alice Cooper. But Brian Connolly's alcoholism was really becoming a major issue in the band. So in late October, at the Townhouse Studios in Shepherd's Bush in London, okay, the band recorded an album called Cut Above the Rest. Now, during the beginning of the recording of that, Brian's vocals were useless, and his health was a serious concern. He was like just drunk all the time. And drummer Mick Tucker, kind of the band gave him the job of just producing Brian. Okay, in other words, they would, as a team, they would produce the album, but Mick, because he knew Brian the longest, they were back from, Wayne's Right Gentlemen back in the early '60s. Okay, the band thought that he could kind of get Brian to do a good job recording, but it didn't work out. Okay, so Connolly only sings lead on a few tracks on that album, and it would all come to a head on November 2nd, 1978. Brian would just leave the band. And they didn't tell anybody. They kept it quiet all the way to February of '79 for 3 months. And the album would eventually come out in April. What they told the press is that, Brian left the band and he was actually going to pursue a career in country rock, which never really happened. Okay.
I think they just did that to save face.
Yeah, and I don't think they wanted it out there, how fucked up he was. They didn't want to hurt him, It just wasn't going to work in the band.
And they became a trio after that.
Yeah, what they did at first, they would audition a couple of singers, but it didn't work out. So they ended up being a three-piece. Steve Priest would do most of the lead vocals, right? And
Steve Priest got a great. It's like
he does have a great voice. He does have
great voice.
Yeah, and Andy Scott and Mick Tucker would do some leads on some songs as well. Now they would bring in a guest keyboard player now named Gary Moberly, and they also brought in a second guitar player for the live shows, a guy named Ray McReiner, and he did an American tour with them in '79 where they opened for Journey and Cheap Trick.
Wow.
Yeah. So the next Sweet album would come out, and it was called Water's Edge. And it came out in August of 1980. It was the first album without Brian. Excuse me. And 2 tracks, one called Too Much Talking, and then there was a single called Give the Lady Some Respect. Both were written by newcomer Mick Reiner. Unfortunately, some tragedy would hit also around that time, because Mick Tucker's wife would drown in the bathtub of their house, the day after Christmas of 1979. So all of 1980, the band went on hiatus. All right, they didn't tour at all that year. Mick Tucker had to get his life together. But they would record one last album called Identity Crisis. They would work on that. They would perform their last live show at Glasgow University on March 20th, 1981. Identity Crisis was actually recorded at that point, but Polydor didn't want to release it, and it didn't come out actually until almost a year after they broke up in 1982. And that's called Identity Crisis, and that was their last album. Andy Scott, at that point, not too long after, would put together his version of Sweet. Okay, yep. It was called Andy Scott's Sweet. And Mick Tucker was in the lineup. There was a revolving door of different musicians. Their first vocalist, the first lead vocalist, was a guy named Paul Mario Day. Now, his name may come up later on when we do a show on Iron Maiden, because Paul Mario Day was Iron Maiden's first singer.
Yep.
Okay. And they would have several lineup changes through that. Now, Mick Tucker, through the 80s, would be in that band, but in 1991, he would leave Andy Scott's Sweet because he got diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia. Okay. Now, in 1984, Brian Connolly had his own version of Sweet. Okay, and it was called Brian Connolly's Sweet. And these two versions of Sweet, the Andy Scott and the Brian Connolly version, would lead to some legal battles between them. Okay, and they had a huge falling out over this. Um, Connolly would eventually make up with Steve Priest and Mick Tucker in 1994. He did record some solo material over the years, but his final concert was December 5th, 1996, at the Bristol Hippodrome. Steve Priest, a little bit later on, starting in 2008, would come back and he would have his own version of Sweet. And that would last until this year when he passed away. I actually saw this version of Sweet back in 2013. They played at the Bergen Performing Arts Center in New Jersey, and it was pretty cool. David Johansen was there from the New York Dolls.
Wow.
They played. Brian Connolly would pass away in February of 1997 from basically liver failure and heart disease. If you see like some later pictures of Connolly, he looked pretty bad. Mick Tucker would die in June of 2002 from his long battle of leukemia. He fought leukemia for over 10 years. And Steve Priest would pass away on June 4th of this year, just a little over a month ago.
Yeah.
So the only guy left is Andy Scott. He's the only one left.
Yeah.
Sad. But they had a good run, and they were, really, really instrumental in so many things. Being influential in the punk scene, I would say, is their biggest contribution. I can remember like Johnny Ramone reading something that he said where, when he was trying to put the Ramones together, it was always a concern that they all really they didn't know how to play. They weren't good musicians, and they were learning as they were going along, but they looked at bands like Sweet, who, you could see Sweet or you could see Slade, and, they weren't Jimi Hendrix, but it was stuff that they felt that they could do. And Sweet definitely influenced punk in England as well. Absolutely.
Because right now the only version, Steve Priestley, right? Does he still perform?
No. Steve Priest passed away last month.
Last month, yeah.
The only guy that's left is Andy Scott. I think.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Andy Scott didn't do because he tried to perform, or he just done with the whole thing.
No, he's around. He's been doing little things here and there. He had his version of Sweet in the '80s.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean the guy's about, he must be about 75 now. Okay, so he's not around too much. You never know. I mean, he may come back.
Yeah, because Steve Priest played to the end almost.
See, but his version of Sweet was really in Europe.
Okay.
Steve Priest lived in America.
Yeah.
So his version played all over the place in America. That's why I was able to see it.
Okay.
But Andy Scott's version never came here, as far as I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
So crazy, man. Crazy fucking history, man. A band that went through a lot of... They didn't go through too many members. The only thing that a lot of the guys left and got tired, and pretty much they continue on,
Hey, they had a great run there in the 70s. And they were able to change their style 2 or 3 times. And
they did.
Still be good and still sell.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean they had a fan base that was loyal and they were just talented. It just was a sign that they were so talented,
And for them to stick it out for all those years and stay together, which all of them could have just easily be like, "Fuck this, we're going our separate way." And they could all started a band.
They could have all been solo.
Yeah,
and they stuck together as a band as long as they could, and even as a 3-piece after Connolly left,
Yeah.
So that's all I got for you today, Mr. Rossi.
Wow, man, that was man. We got like a good hour and 5 minutes of the Sweet, pretty intense show. A lot of information. I learned a lot about them and a lot of the stuff that they did. I think later on we might have to revisit like Chapman and Chin. Maybe they'll get their own show.
Yeah, or definitely like a making of Desolation Boulevard or
Yeah,
something.
because these guys were interesting guys too. If you start reading them, like some people, they got people love them or hate them. There's no in between. It's amazing if you start reading a little bit of their history.
Yeah. Now, Steve Priest has a biography that he wrote that I've actually never read, so it's on my bucket list. So I'm definitely going to read about that. Yeah, we'll revisit Sweet maybe in a few months. They're
Oh,
definitely important.
so he did write a book, right?
Yeah, it's called "Are You Ready, Steve?"
Are you ready, Steve? I wonder. It's probably about the sweets, right? Probably.
It's all about the Sweet, because even the title "Are You Ready, Steve?"
Yeah. Are you ready, Steve?
That's the beginning of Ballroom Blitz.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Oh man, so Mike, this is the 82nd edition of the Rock Show, man. Great job on the history of the Sweden. A lot of details, a lot of inside information that only Rocker Mike can fucking get you.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. So we're also once again, we're changing some stuff. We're gonna go back to video soon.
Yep.
Probably later shows on. Right now, we're working on some video, but I'm glad that everybody enjoys the show. We get some great feedback. We get some people that they're like, "Holy shit, man! I love you guys' show." We get a lot of good feedback. We got shirts now. If you want to purchase a shirt, go to prowrestlingtee.com. Getting lumped up and get the rock show t-shirt and
Is the Rock Show shirt up there already?
yeah, it's up there. If you go to Pro Wrestling T, it's up there. It's the one that say the Rock Show, and it say so. We probably the next time we'll do like a show on conspiracy. We'll put the shirts on
Okay, excellent.
because they're up there. And another thing, Mike, how can people email you, reach you? And also, we got to do another group thing. We're getting together with people and talk to them like we did that one night.
Yeah, I think we'll do that in a week or two
Okay.
before the month is over.
All right.
One thing I want to mention is the next show we're doing is on Slade.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
another great band from that same era, pretty much. We may have a guest for that show. Hopefully we get a friend of mine that is very acquainted with that band.
Okay.
And also, if you want to find me, I'm on Instagram, Rocker Mike 212. I'm on Twitter, Rocker Mike 3. I'm on Facebook under my real name, which is Michael Baker, Baker. And then also, we got the Rock Show podcast group page on Facebook. Lots of stuff on there every day. The podcast, of course, song of the day, lumped up song of the night, all kinds of everything, album covers, interviews. I try to post at least 10 or 12 things every day. Feel free to join and post your own shit. That'd be
Yeah,
cool.
but like I find a lot of I found or they send me interesting article a lot of time, and I put a lot of weird shit up there anytime whenever I find something that looks
Right.
familiar and weird. We got 156 members. We just added 2 more members, and
Cool.
you know what? We keep growing. The rock show's growing, and we do a lot of research and stuff. So guys, get the T-shirt, help us out. Go and also follow us at Getting Lumped Up. Go to the website, check us out. You can see pictures of our mugs, and they also got a link to the shows everywhere, from YouTube to Instagram. That wherever the show's on, you can pretty much find it there. And we're pretty much on almost every podcast platform. So right now, we're probably in 53 different platforms.
Excellent.
So
And where can we find you, Rob? So they know
you
where to get
can
you.
pretty much find me on the Rock Show webpage also that Mike did for Facebook. That's the Rock Show podcast for your Rocker Mike and Rob. You can reach me at Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube at anything Getting Lumped Up. You look Getting Lumped Up, you're gonna see my big nugget there. And you're going to see my face, and then right there, it will take you to any link that you guys want to see. But I'd like to thank the people. I'd like to thank Rocker Mike, and this is a journey so far, and we're enjoying doing the show and bringing this to you guys every week. And we're like, dude, we're so far ahead. We got so many shows that you guys are going to be like, oh, my God.
Yeah, they're all in. we could die and there'd still be shows coming out.
It'll be like Tupac.
Be a lot of albums coming out, right? All right.
All
Well,
right,
it's
man.
fun as usual, Rob. I love
Yeah,
it.
great show, man. Great show, great job, and we'll see you next week, folks. And we'll have a special show, and Mike might have a special guest.
And remember,
Don't get drunk, get lumped up. See you later.
Take care, people.
All right, bye.